Okay, we're being asked we don't have to solve this. All we have to do is part A. Without actually solving, list all the possible numbers that would have to be rejected if they appeared as potential solutions. So any thing that makes an undefined fraction will not be allowed. So if this denominator were 0, whatever causes that would not be allowed. So we have x plus 1 cannot be equal to 0, and x minus 2 cannot be equal to 0. This says that x cannot equal negative 1. This says that x cannot equal positive 2. So x could not be equal to negative 1 and positive 2. Now, there's a shortcut. All it is, it's always the opposite of this and this number over the coefficient. So negative 1 over 1 and positive 2 over 1. So again, we're just doing part A. So x cannot be equal to, it's going to be negative 5 over 3, 0 from this, and negative 3 over 2. X could potentially be anything else, but it cannot be any of those numbers. Again, we're not solving for x, we're finding what x could not be. So x could not be equal to 0 from this, 0 from this, and we don't have a restriction from this because it's not a variable. So just x can't be equal to 0. Okay, x cannot be equal to, we're only looking at the denominators, positive 4 over 1 and positive 7 over 2. Okay, before we know that x cannot be negative 3 and positive 2, but we have to factor this first. This is going to factor as x times x minus 1. So x cannot be equal to a 0 from this, a positive 1 from this, a negative 3 from this, and a positive 2 from this. So x can't be equal to any of those 4 values. Could be equal to anything else potentially. Okay, here we're going to start solving, but when we solve, we know that x cannot be equal to 0. So we'll just throw that on the side, because if it ends up being 0, we have to throw that solution out. So the way we solve this is I'm going to multiply each of these fractions by the LCD. And the LCD is 4x. Okay? Now, I'm going to take 4x and I'm going to multiply by negative 5 over 2x plus 4x times 3 over 4x equals 4x times negative 7 over 4. And then I'm going to cancel. This goes into this twice, and the x's cancel, and I'm left with negative 10 there. Plus, this entire 4x cancels, so we just have 3 equals. The 4 cancels, and we're left with negative 7x. So negative 7 is equal to negative 7x, so positive 1 is equal to x. X is equal to 1. Now I got to double check. My restricted value was 0, but this is not 0, so that is my final solution. X equals 1. Okay, I'm going to find an LCD. The smallest number that 3, 5, and 45 can go into is 45, and I also have an x. Alright, so I'm going to take my LCD. Oh, and by the way, x cannot be equal to 0. Right? That's from this and this. Alright, now I'm going to take my LCD and I'm going to multiply by the first fraction. I'll take that LCD and I'm going to multiply by the second fraction. And I'll take that LCD and I'm going to multiply by the third fraction. And I'm going to start canceling. 5 goes into 45 9 times, and these x's cancel. Here, 3 goes into 45 15 times, and the x's cancel. And finally, 45 and 45 cancel, so what we're left with is 9 times 6 is 54 minus 15 times 2 is 30 equals negative 8 times x. 54 minus 30 is 24. And if I divide by negative 8, I'll get x is equal to positive or negative 3. Now my restricted value was that x could not be equal to 0. So that's not 0, so this is okay, and I circle my answer. Okay, my LCD, well, my only denominator is x, so my LCD must be x. And that tells me that x cannot be equal to 0. All right, now, I'm going to take that denominator, the LCD, and I'm going to multiply by this first fraction here. So I have times x minus, and I'll take the x and I'll multiply by my second fraction. And I'll take the x and I'll multiply by the third item. So here I'm going to get x squared minus, these x's cancel, so I just have 24 equals negative 2x. This is a quadratic equation, so I have to set it equal to 0. So I'll move that negative 2x to the left and it'll become positive, and I'll put it in order so that I can factor. So I have x plus 6 and x minus 4 equals 0. So I've got x is equal to negative 6 and positive 4. Now before I circle this, I'm going to go back and remind myself that x cannot be equal to 0. None of those are zeros, so I circle my answer. Okay, my only denominator is p, so my LCD is p, and I know that p cannot be equal to 0. So I'll take that denominator p and I'll multiply by the first fraction of p plus, and I'll take that p and I'll multiply by the second term, and I'll take that p and I'll multiply by the third term. So I'm going to end up with p squared plus, here these p's cancel, so I have 15 equals negative 8p. This is a quadratic equation, so I have to move this to the left, and it flips signs when I do that. I'll put it in order, and now it's equal to 0. So now I'll factor. I have p plus 5 and p plus 3. So this tells me that p is equal to negative 5 and negative 3. And before I circle it, I'll double check my restricted values, and it's not there, so all of those values are okay. And I circle. Okay, here, this tells me that x cannot be equal to negative 6. And this tells me that x cannot be equal to positive 1 over 2. Oops. Now, whenever you have a single fraction is equal to another single fraction, you can always cross multiply. So in other words, I'm going to have x minus 4 times 2x minus 1 is equal to x plus 6 times 2x plus 3. And I'm going to FOIL on each side. On the left, my first is 2x squared. The outer is negative x. The inner is negative 8x. And the last is positive 4. And that's going to combine to that. On the right, I'll FOIL. My first is 2x squared. The outer is a positive 3x. The inner is a positive 12x. And the last is a positive 18. And this will combine to 15x. Now, we'll subtract 2x squared from each side, so that goes away. And let's see, I'll move this negative 9 to the right. So I'll add it. 15 plus 9 is 24x. And I'll move this 18 to the left, so I'm subtracting it. 4 minus 18 is a negative 14. And now I'll divide by 24. And I'll get x is equal to, and I'll reduce this fraction by 2. So I'll get a negative 7 over 12. Now before I circle that, I go back to my restrictions, and I see that x couldn't be negative 6 or 1 over 2, so this is okay, and I circle it. Okay, here my LCD I can see is, well, you know what, I don't even need to find my LCD because I can cross multiply, but I do want to do my restrictions. X cannot be equal to negative 2 and negative 3. negative 2 from this, and negative 3 from this. So now one fraction equals another fraction, so I'm going to cross multiply. And I'm going to FOIL on each side. First on the left is 5x squared. The outer is a positive 15x, the inner is a negative 8x, and the last is negative 24. On the right, my first is 5x squared, my outer is negative x, the inner is a positive 10x, and the last is a negative 2. I'll subtract 5x squared from each side, and that goes away. So I have 15x minus 8x is a 7x, and negative x plus 10 is a positive 9x. I like moving my x's to the side that makes it positive, so I'll move my 7x over by subtracting. 9x minus 7x is 2x. And I'll move my negative 2 over by adding. Negative 24 plus 2 is negative 22. Now I'll divide by 2, and I'll get x is equal to negative 11. And neither of these are my restricted values, so this answer is fine, and I circle it. Okay, my restricted values are that x cannot be equal to 4 and positive 7 over 2. All right, I have one fraction equals another, so I'm going to cross multiply. And I have 3x plus 1 times 2x minus 7 is equal to x minus 4 times 6x plus 5. I'll FOIL on the left and the right. Here I have 6x squared from the first, negative 21x from the outer, positive 2x from the inner, and negative 7 from the last. On the right I have 6x squared from the first, positive 5x from the outer, negative 24x from the inner, and negative 20 for the last. I'll subtract 6x squared from each side, so those go away. And I'm left with negative 21 plus 2 is a negative 19x minus 7. On the right, 5 minus 24 is a negative 19x minus 20. Well, if I move the 19x over by adding it, I'm going to get a 0 on the left. And if I move the 7 over by adding it, negative 20 plus 7 is a negative 13. Well, this is a false statement, and it doesn't depend on x. So this is a no solution, and we answer it like this. All right, my restricted values are that x cannot be equal to negative 3 over 2 and positive 2 over 6, which is 1 over 3. All right, now I'm going to cross multiply. Oops, what did I just do? I'm going to cross multiply. So I'm going to have 4x minus 1 times 6x minus 2 is equal to 2x plus 3 times 12x minus 25. And I'm going to FOIL on each side. Here on the left, my first is 24x squared minus 8x minus 6x plus 2. On the right, I'll FOIL and I'll get 24x squared minus 50x plus 36x minus 75. I'm going to subtract 24x squared from each side. That's going to go away. These combine to negative 14x. These combine to negative 14x. And I can see that this is a no solution. If I continue this problem, I'll move this over by adding it, and I'll get 0 on the left. I'll move this over by subtracting it. Negative 75 minus 2 is negative 77. And so I can see that I have a no solution. Okay, this is factored, but this is not factored. So before I find my LCD, I'm going to factor this. So I'll just kind of draw a line through this, and this is really 3 times y minus 1. So now my different factors are 3 and 12, where the LCD between those is 12, and y minus 1. So my LCD is 12 times y minus 1. Now, I have three fractions, so I'm going to take my LCD and multiply by each of the three terms. So I'll take my 12 times y minus 1, and I'll multiply by my first thing, plus, and I'll take my 12 times y minus 1, and I'll multiply that by the second fraction, and I'll take the 12 times y minus 1, and I'll multiply by the third fraction. And then I'm going to start canceling. Y minus 1 cancels, 12 cancels, and here the y minus 1 cancels, but we also can cancel by saying that 3 goes into this 4 times. Okay, now, in this, I'm just left with 12. Over here, I have this 5, and it's being multiplied by here, so I distribute the 5, and I'll get positive 5y minus 5 equals, and when I multiply there, I get negative 8. So now let's combine like terms. 5y plus 7 equals negative 8. I'm going to move the 7 over by subtracting it, and I'll get 5y is equal to negative 15. I'll divide by 5, and I'll get y is equal to negative 3. Now I forgot to show my restricted values, but my restricted values you can always find from your LCD. This does not contribute to it, but this tells us that y cannot be equal to positive 1. This is not a positive 1, so this is an acceptable answer, and there it is. Okay, here I have three fractions. I'm going to factor this one first. This becomes 3 times m plus 2. Okay, now, my different factors are 9 and 3. Between those, my LCD is 9. And then I have the m plus 2. So that's part of my LCD as well. And my restricted value is that m cannot be equal to negative 2. Alright, now, so I'm going to take my LCD, the 9 times m plus 2, and I'm going to multiply it by the first fraction, minus, I'll take that 9 times m plus 2, and I'm going to multiply it by the second fraction, and I'll take the 9 times m plus 2, and I'll multiply it by the third fraction. And then I'm going to start canceling. M plus 2 cancels there, 9 cancels there, and m plus 2 cancels here. So in the first fraction, we have a 36. Now, this is really difficult here, but we have a negative and an 11 and this. So I've got to distribute the negative and the 11 into this. So really, when you're thinking about it, you're thinking about it like this. And this negative 11 is going to distribute. And we're going to get negative 11m minus 22. And then we can cancel here and say that 3 goes into 9 3 times. So we just have equals 3. All right. So now I have a negative 11m. 36 minus 22 is a positive 14. I'll move this over. 3 minus 14 is negative 11. I'll divide by negative 11. And I'll get m is equal to positive 1. Before I circle this, I have to go back to this and realize that m cannot be negative 2. Well, that's not negative 2, so that's allowed. And we're done. Okay, I'm going to factor all these denominators before I decide on the LCD. So this is 3 times t minus 2. This is 4 times t minus 2. So my LCD is 3 36 and 4. 36 is part of the LCD. And then we have the t minus 2. This tells me that t cannot be equal to 2. Okay, so I'll put that off on the side. So now I'm going to take my LCD, 36 times t minus 2, and I'm going to multiply by the first fraction. And I'll take my LCD, and I'll multiply by the second fraction. And I'll take my LCD, and I'll multiply by the final fraction. And then let's cancel. T minus 2 cancels there. 3 goes into 36 12 times, and when I multiply, I get a negative 24. Now this is going to be a little tricky. When I cancel the 36, we have a negative sitting out here, and the negative is going to distribute through the t minus 2. So I'm going to get a negative t plus a 2. Over here I'm going to cancel t minus 2, and I'm also going to say that 4 goes into 36 9 times. So when I multiply here, 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. Combining like terms, negative 24 plus 2 is negative 22. Now let me do that better. Now I'm going to add the 22 to each side, and I get negative t is equal to negative 5. That tells me that t is equal to positive 5. And if I look back at my restricted value, t could not be equal to 2, so 5 is okay. And that's it. Okay, so this is factored, but this isn't. So I'm going to factor that. So this is k plus 2 times k minus 2. Those are conjugate pairs. So my LCD is k plus 2 times k minus 2. And you can always find your restricted value just from simply looking at your LCD. So we can see that k cannot be equal to either plus or minus 2. All right, so now let's take the denominator, and I'm going to multiply by the first fraction, and I'll take that denominator, and I'll multiply by the second fraction, equals, and I'll take that denominator, and I'll multiply by the third fraction. And then let's start canceling. Here I have k plus 2 cancels, so I'll take the 3 and distribute it through, and we'll get 3k minus 6. Over here, the k plus 2 and the k minus 2 cancel completely, and we just have a minus 2. And then here, the k minus 2 cancels, and we have a 1 times k plus 2, which is just k plus 2. So let's combine like terms. 3k minus 8 equals k plus 2. I'm going to move my k to the left by subtracting it, and I'll get 2k. And I'm going to move the 8 to the right by adding it, and I'll get 2 plus 8 is 10. Finally, I'm going to divide by 2, and we'll get k is equal to 5. And that's not a restricted value, so this is okay, and that's our final answer. Okay, this is factored, but this is not. So I'm going to start by factoring this, and this is going to be y plus 7 times y plus 2. So here's a y plus 2, here's a y plus 7, nothing's happening more than once, so my LCD is y plus 7 and y plus 2. Now looking at my LCD, I can see that y cannot be equal to negative 7 or negative 2. So those are my restricted values. All right, now I'm going to take that denominator and I'm going to multiply it by the first fraction. And I'll take that denominator and I'll multiply it by the second fraction. And I'll take that denominator and I'll multiply it by the third fraction. And then I'm going to cancel. Y plus 2 cancels, and I'll have 1 distributing into this, which is just y plus 7. Then I'll cancel over here. Y plus 7 cancels, and then I'll have a 3 distributing into this, and I'll get a positive 3y plus 6 equals, and then everything cancels, so we're left with 5. So here we have a 4y plus 13 equals 5. I'll move the 13 over by subtracting it, and we'll get 4y is equal to negative 8, and I'll divide by 4, and I'll get y is equal to negative 2. But this is a restricted value. Y cannot be negative 2, so I have to throw this out, and our answer is no solution. Okay, let's factor these. So I'm going to have this is 3 times 2x minus 1. So that's the the LCD is x times 3 times 2x minus 1. Putting it all together. The x from here, the 3 from here, and the 2x minus 1 from there. So we can see that x cannot be equal to a 0 from this and a positive 1/2 from this. All right, now I'm going to take my denominator and I'm going to multiply by the first fraction, and I'll take the denominator and I'll multiply by the second fraction, and it's equals, and I'll take that denominator and I'll multiply by the second fraction, or the last fraction. And then let's cancel. This x cancels with that, and then here's what I'm going to have. I'm going to multiply the 9 and the 3 to get 27, and then I'm going to take that 27 and distribute through here. So 27 times this is a 54x, and 27 times negative 1 is a negative 27. Plus, now let's see, 3's cancel, and 2x minus 1's cancel, so I'm left with 4 times x. And then let's cancel here. 2x minus 1's cancel, and 3's cancel, so I'm left with x times 2. So I have 58x minus 27 equals 2x. I'll move my 2x to the left by subtracting it, and I'll move my 27 to the right by adding it. And I'll get 56x is equal to 27. And finally, I'll divide by 56, and I'll get x is equal to 27 over 56. And that is not one of the restricted values, so this answer is okay, and I circle it. Okay, this is factored, but this is not, so I'm going to factor this. This is a w plus 3 and a w minus 5. Okay, now, there's our w plus 3, there's our w minus 5, so our LCD is w plus 3 and w minus 5. And this tells us that w cannot be equal to negative 3 and positive 5. All right, now, So I'm going to take my LCD and I'm going to multiply by the first fraction, and I'll take the LCD and I'll multiply by the second fraction, and I'll take the LCD and I'll multiply by the last fraction. And then I'm going to start canceling. That cancels, and then this 6 distributes through here, and I get 6w minus 30. And then the w minus 5 cancels, and this negative 7 distributes through this and gives us negative 7w minus 21. And finally, all of this cancels, and we're left with negative 48 there. So when I combine like terms, 6 minus 7 is negative 1w. Negative 30 minus 21 is negative 51. I'll move my 51 to the right by adding it. And I'm going to get negative w is equal to positive 3. So that tells us that w is equal to negative 3. But I can't circle this because this is one of our restricted values. So this is not allowed and has to be thrown out. And therefore we end up with no solution. Okay, this is factored, but this is not. So I'm going to factor that. So I can see that my LCD is x plus 3 times x minus 3. And that my restricted values are x cannot be equal to plus or minus 3. So I'm going to take my LCD and I'm going to multiply by the first fraction, and I'll take the LCD and I'm going to multiply by the second fraction, and I'll take the LCD and I'll multiply by the third fraction. So now x minus 3 cancels, and I'll take this x and I'll distribute it through there, and I'll get x squared plus 3x. And then in the second fraction, or the second term, I'll cancel there, and I'll take the positive 4 and I'll distribute through there, and I'll get positive 4x minus 12. And then everything cancels here, so we're left with 18. So I have x squared plus 7x. Now I'm going to move this 18 over because I see it's a quadratic and I want to set it equal to 0. So negative 12 minus 18 is negative 30. And I'll factor this. Let's see, factors of 30 that give me a difference of 7 are positive 10 and negative 3. So this tells us that x is equal to positive 10, or excuse me, not positive 10, but negative 10 and positive 3. But negative 3 was a restricted value, or positive 3 was a restricted value. So that needs to be thrown out. So my only answer is negative 10. So x is equal to negative 10. Okay, this can't be factored, this can't be factored, but this can, so let's do that. So the LCD is x times x minus 4. And that tells us that x cannot be equal to 0 or positive 4. 0 from this and positive 4 from this. So I'm going to take my LCD and I'll multiply by the first fraction. I'll take the LCD and I'll multiply by the second fraction, and I'll take the LCD and I'll multiply by the third fraction. Here the x minus 4 is canceled, and I'm left with 6x. Here the x's cancel, and I'll take the positive 5. It's a positive 5, and I'll just distribute it through there, and I'll get 5x minus 20. And then here, all of this cancels, so you're left with negative 20. This combines to 11x. I'm going to move the 20 to the right by adding it. Negative 20 plus 20 is 0, so x is equal to 0. But x equals 0 is one of our restricted domain values, so this has to be thrown out. So we end up with no solution. All right, this cannot be factored. This cannot, but this can, so let's factor that. Take out a 3, and we're left with 4x plus 7. So here we have a factor of 3, so our LCD is going to have a factor of 3. And here we have a 4x plus 7, so that's going to be in our LCD as well. And this tells us that x cannot be equal to negative 7 over 4 from here. This does not contribute to the restriction. So now I'm going to take the LCD, and I'm going to multiply by the first fraction. I'll take that LCD, and I'll multiply by the second fraction. And I'll take that LCD, and I'll multiply by the third fraction. All right, that cancels, and I'm left with 2 times 3 is 6. This 3 cancels, and then I'm going to take the x, and it's a positive x, so I'm going to distribute that through there, and we're going to get 4x squared plus 7x equals, and then this entire thing cancels there, so we just have 6. So we're going to have 4x squared plus 7x, and I'll move this over by subtracting, and I'll get 6 minus 6 is 0. So that term disappears, and now it's equal to 0. We have a GCF here of x. So let's start by taking out the x, and I'm left with 4x plus 7. So x is going to be equal to 0 from this, and negative 7/4 from this. Now when I look back at my restricted domain value, x could not be negative 7 over 4. So this has to be thrown out. But it's not on those solutions because we still do have a valid solution. So x is equal to 0. And that's it.